The sun had barely risen over the golden skyline when Alexander Grayson's mansion stirred to life. Servants hurried quietly through the corridors, adjusting curtains and polishing glass walls that reflected wealth beyond imagination. Outside, the marble driveway glistened as expensive cars lined up like trophies of conquest. Alexander, the self-proclaimed king of commerce, was a man whose smile could charm investors and whose temper could break them. He lived by one rule. That morning, however, the world would begin to balance itself in ways he couldn't imagine. Behind the mansion, a small brown puppy had wandered through the open gates. Thin, shivering, and lost, it was barely 3 months old. Its fur was matted with dust, its ribs visible, and its tail wagged hesitantly as if begging for a little kindness. One of the gardeners spotted the animal and smiled softly, offering a piece of bread. But before the man could help, Alexander's black shoes echoed across the stone path. "What's that filthy creature doing here?" he barked. The gardener froze. "Sir, it's just a stray. I didn't ask for strays," Alexander snapped, his eyes narrowing. Without a moment's hesitation, he grabbed a walking stick lying by the fence. The puppy, sensing danger, whimpered and tried to run, but Alexander's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Stay still, you useless thing." He swung once, then twice, and the sound of blows echoed against the marble walls. The gardener turned away, unable to watch. The puppy's cries were faint, desperate pleas that fell on deaf ears. The world had always bowed Alexander's cruelty, and he believed this would be no different. To him, the animal was nothing, a meaningless creature beneath his notice. When he was done, he laughed, tossing the stick aside as if he'd just finished a casual game. "That'll teach it not to trespass," he muttered. The gardener rushed to the small body, lifting it gently. Blood trickled from a cut near its ear, and the little creature's chest rose and fell weakly. "Get rid of it," Alexander ordered, turning away. His phone buzzed another business alert, another deal, another fortune, and he thought no more of the dying puppy. But nature keeps its own records, and the world has a way of remembering cruelty. As Alexander entered his house, his phone flickered strangely. A power surge hit the estate's main system, shutting off the lights for a split second. The security team scrambled to fix the glitch, but it was only the first sign. In the distance, a dark cloud began to gather. Though the forecast had promised clear skies, the air thickened, as if the mansion itself was holding its breath. Inside, Alexander smiled at his reflection in the glass, unaware that his empire, built on arrogance and disregard for life, was about to crumble piece by piece, starting in just 10 minutes. The clock struck 10, and a gust of wind brushed through the mansion's courtyard. It was strange. There hadn't been a single breeze all morning. The staff glanced nervously toward the sky, where dark clouds had begun to swirl, heavy and brooding. The day that was supposed to shine bright for Alexander Grayson's biggest business announcement had suddenly turned gray. Inside his office, he stood before a floor-to-ceiling screen displaying stock charts, his empire spread out like a kingdom under his control. Billions flowed through his companies: real estate, energy, media, even animal product trading. A cruel irony that animals unknowingly contributed to his wealth. He smirked as he sipped his imported coffee, glancing at the breaking news ticker running beneath the graphs. Grayson Industries to acquire Orion Labs in a $2.5 billion deal. He loved the sound of power, the way the world bowed when his name appeared on the news. Then his phone vibrated, not once but continuously. The screen flashed with alerts. System error detected. Market update failed. He frowned and tapped the display, but the data didn't load. His assistant Nora rushed in, pale-faced. "Sir, the servers are down across all branches. We're losing access to the trading system." Alexander slammed his mug on the table, coffee splattering across expensive documents. "Impossible. We have backups." "They're not responding either," she said quietly. He turned sharply toward the large window, his reflection warped by the darkening sky. "Fix it," he hissed, before investors started to notice. But investors already had. Across the city, traders and shareholders were panicking. Orion Labs, the company he was supposed to acquire, suddenly pulled out of the deal. The reason? An anonymous email leak had revealed confidential information about Grayson Industries, tax evasion, animal cruelty in his leather factories, bribes. "Sir," Nora whispered, trembling, "this email is everywhere. The media, they're running it live." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Who sent it?" "We don't know. The address is untraceable." He grabbed his coat and stormed toward his car, his rage bubbling. "I built this empire from nothing. I'll crush whoever did this." As his car sped down the private road, the storm broke. Rain pounded on the windshield, and thunder rolled through the hills. The mansion behind him seemed to vanish into shadow. The driver, uneasy, gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Sir, it's getting worse. Maybe we should wait. Drive?" Alexander snapped. A flash of lightning illuminated the forest road, and for a split second, Alexander saw something small and pale on the asphalt. It looked like a dog, a puppy, staring straight at him through the downpour. "Watch out!" the driver shouted, swerving hard. The tires screamed, the car skidded, and with a jolt, it slammed into a tree. Airbags burst open with a hiss. Silence followed, broken only by the rain tapping against the broken glass. When Alexander opened his eyes, everything was blurry. The driver was unconscious, but breathing. His own hand bled from a shallow cut. The smell of smoke and wet earth filled the air. He stumbled out of the car, clutching his chest. The storm had calmed slightly, but the strange part was there was no sign of the puppy. Not a footprint, not a shadow, nothing. Only the sound of distant barking echoed through the forest, haunting and hollow. He shook his head, trying to dismiss it. "I'm losing my mind," he muttered, pulling out his phone to call for help. But the screen flickered. No signal. It took him nearly an hour to get back to the main road. By then, his company's downfall had accelerated. Social media was flooded with the leaked documents. Hashtags trended. Hashtag Grayson Cruelty. Hashtag Justice for Animals. Hashtag Boycott Grayson. Videos from his leather factories surfaced online. Workers mistreating animals under his orders. Celebrities condemned him. Activists demanded his arrest. By the time he reached his downtown headquarters, a crowd had already gathered outside, holding signs and chanting his name with fury. Grayson, animal abuser, monster. He froze as someone threw a can toward his car. It clanged against the door, leaving a dent. Cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters swarmed him, microphones thrust in his face. "Mr. Grayson, is it true you run illegal animal farms? Did you order the killing of stray dogs around your estate? Do you have a response to the leaked footage?" Alexander said nothing. He pushed through the crowd, soaked and furious. Inside the building, his executives looked terrified. One of them stepped forward, voice trembling. "Sir, we're finished. Investors are withdrawing. The board wants your resignation." His vision tunneled. Everything, his empire, his control, his carefully built image, was collapsing within minutes. The storm outside roared again, thunder shaking the windows. "You can't fire me," he said quietly. "I am this company." The man shook his head. "Not anymore." Alexander walked to the corner of his glass office, staring at the city below. Rain streamed down the window like tears from heaven. Somewhere in the distance, he thought he saw the same brown puppy standing at a street corner, soaked, staring right up at him through the mist. He blinked, but it was gone. His reflection now looked older, weaker, haunted. He had mocked mercy all his life, but now mercy was mocking him. And though only 10 minutes had passed since he first raised his hand against that helpless creature, Alexander Grayson had already lost everything that once made him untouchable. The night stretched long and sleepless. Alexander sat alone in his penthouse, the lights dimmed, his phone silent, except for one notification after another. Each one a new disaster. His accounts were being frozen. His sponsors had pulled out. The media had declared him the cruel king of commerce. He had built walls of money and power around himself for decades, but they were crumbling now, stone by stone, secret by secret. The empire that had once obeyed his every command now treated him like a disease to be avoided. He stared at the rain streaking across the glass walls, his reflection fractured in every droplet. His once sharp, confident eyes were now bloodshot and uncertain. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, the only comfort left that hadn't betrayed him yet. The amber liquid trembled in the glass, shimmering with the city lights. But as he raised it to his lips, a soft sound stopped him. A whimper. It was faint, coming from the far end of the penthouse. He froze, glass halfway up. The sound came again, a small, broken cry, like that of a wounded puppy. His fingers tightened. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. Not real. But curiosity or fear drove him to follow it. He walked barefoot across the cold marble floor, heart hammering against his ribs. The sound led him toward his private elevator, the one that opened directly into his home office. The door slid open with a low hiss. Inside it was dark. Only the blinking blue lights of his security screens illuminated the space. He stepped in, scanning the room. Nothing, just silence. He exhaled shakily, rubbing his face. "I'm losing it," he muttered. But then one of the screens flickered. The camera feed from his mansion's backyard appeared, the very spot where he had beaten the puppy. The footage was live, yet impossible. He hadn't been there since morning. The gardener had long gone. And yet, there it was, the small shape of a puppy, sitting exactly where it had fallen, staring straight into the camera. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the night vision filter. Alexander's throat went dry. He leaned closer. No, this can't be real. He reached for the keyboard to switch feeds, but the system froze. The puppy tilted its head slightly, then began to limp toward the camera. The screen turned static. A high-pitched whine filled the room. Alexander stumbled back, covering his ears. The lights flickered violently. The elevator door slammed shut behind him, trapping him inside. He hit the button again and again, shouting for a security team, but the intercom was dead. Suddenly, the screen came back to life, not with a live feed, but with a replay, the replay of him striking the puppy. The sound of each blow echoed through the room. Whack, whimper, whack. He dropped to his knees, staring in disbelief as his own cruelty played before him like a nightmare he couldn't escape. And then the image changed. The puppy's small, lifeless body began to twitch. Slowly, unnaturally, it stood up. Blood still dripped from its ear, but its eyes, those once soft brown eyes, now burned with almost human intensity. It took a step closer to the camera. The static crackled louder. The lights went out. When the power returned, Alexander was sitting against the wall, shaking. The whiskey glass had shattered beside him, its contents spreading like a stain of guilt across the floor. His head pounded. He pressed his palms to his temples, trying to steady his breathing. "It's not real. It's not real," he repeated. But deep down, something inside him whispered otherwise. He got up and stormed out of the elevator, calling for his assistant. "Nora, I want security doubled. I want every file, every camera feed shut down." But no one answered. The apartment was empty. His voice echoed through the silence like a cry in a tomb. He stumbled into his office, grabbing his phone. 10 missed calls from his lawyer. The message read, "Alexander, there's an investigation. The authorities are issuing warrants. Someone uploaded footage from your mansion security system. The entire thing." He dropped the phone. His knees nearly gave way. That footage, the beating, was out in the world now, for everyone to see. The gardener must have leaked it, he thought. Or maybe the hacker who exposed his files. But another part of him, the part that refused to be silenced by logic, whispered, what if it wasn't them? What if it was it? The clock struck midnight. Thunder rumbled again, though the storm had long passed. He walked to the window and looked down at the city lights. From his height, they resembled tiny candles flickering in the dark. Fragile, temporary. In the reflection of the glass, he thought he saw movement behind him. A small shadow, four-legged, pacing slowly. He turned sharply. Nothing there. But when he looked back at the glass, the reflection was still there. The puppy, standing behind him, silent, watching. He spun around, heart racing. "Show yourself," he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. Nothing answered, only the wind howling through the half-open balcony door. He walked toward it, closing it with trembling hands. "I'm not afraid of ghosts," he whispered to himself, though his voice said otherwise. He sat back at his desk, exhausted, haunted, and hollow. Somewhere deep within, guilt had started to eat away at him. Not because the world hated him now, but because for the first time he saw himself through the eyes of what he had hurt, small, powerless, begging for mercy that never came. By dawn, Alexander looked like a ghost of himself. His crisp suits were replaced with wrinkled clothes, his hair unkempt, his eyes sunken. The city outside still slept, but inside his penthouse, shadows moved like living things. He had barely slept all night. Each time his eyes closed, he heard the soft sound of paws on marble or a faint whine right beside his bed. When he turned on the lights, nothing was there, but his body remembered the sound. The guilt and fear had merged into one terrible presence that followed him everywhere. He poured another glass of whiskey, hands trembling. It was only 7 a.m. The bottle was already half empty. The television flickered on by itself, startling him. The news anchor's voice filled the silence. Alexander Grayson, once hailed as a genius billionaire of the decade, is now facing public outrage following leaked footage showing animal abuse and unethical practices across his businesses. Alexander threw the remote at the screen. It shattered, sparks flying. "Enough!" he roared. But the broken screen didn't go dark. It glitched and displayed something else. The image of the puppy again, sitting in that same garden. Its fur was cleaner now, its eyes no longer fearful, but sorrowful, as if staring right through him. The static behind the image pulsed like a heartbeat. He stumbled back, the glass falling from his hand. "What do you want from me?" he whispered. Suddenly, his phone rang, the old landline, the one he hadn't used in years. Its shrill tone cut through the air like a blade. He hesitated, then picked up. "Who is this?" A soft voice answered, small and trembling. "You left me there." He froze. "Who is this?" The line crackled. "You left me to die, Mr. Grayson." The voice was that of a child, or something pretending to be one. His throat went dry. "If this is some activist prank, I'll—" The voice interrupted, firmer now. "You hit me. You laughed. Do you remember the sound I made?" Then came a faint whimper, the exact one the puppy had made when he struck it. His hand shook so badly he dropped the phone. It clattered onto the floor, still emitting the faint sound of crying, before going dead. His heart pounded so violently he thought it would burst. He rushed toward the door, fumbling with his keys, intent on escaping the apartment. But when he opened it, the hallway was pitch black. The lights had gone out. A single set of wet paw prints led down the hall, shining faintly against a marble floor. They were fresh, leading away from his door. His instinct screamed at him to shut it and lock himself inside, but something deeper, guilt, fear, or curiosity, pushed him to follow. He stepped out barefoot into the cold hallway. Each step he took echoed too loudly. The elevator at the end of the hall dinged softly and opened by itself. The lights inside flickered, and for a brief moment, he saw a small shadow sitting in the corner, the same outline of a puppy. The door shut before he could move. He stood frozen, staring at the closed elevator, his pulse pounding in his ears. Then, from inside, he heard the faint scratching of claws on metal. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Over and over, rhythmic, relentless. He stumbled back into his apartment, slamming the door shut. He locked it, bolted it, even pushed a heavy chair against it. "You're losing your mind," he muttered to himself, pacing the floor. "You just need rest. Sleep. That's all." But sleep didn't come. His phone buzzed again, a new message. He glanced down. It was a video file, no sender ID. Against every instinct, he opened it. The screen showed his own mansion's garden again, recorded from a distance. The puppy appeared, sitting beside the same spot where he had beaten it. But now behind it, something else moved, a shadow of a man that looked exactly like him. The figure in the video knelt beside the puppy and reached out to touch it, but the puppy turned away, limping. The man looked up at the camera, and Alexander gasped. The man's eyes were hollow, black pits that reflected nothing. His own face staring back at him, empty of humanity. The video ended abruptly, replaced by a single text on the screen. You can't undo what's been done. That was when the storm outside returned, sudden, violent, and loud. Lightning flashed through glass windows, illuminating the room. For a moment, he saw the reflection of the puppy standing right beside him, dripping wet, staring into his eyes. Its fur glistened like rain-soaked gold, but its expression wasn't angry. It was disappointed. He turned quickly, but there was nothing, only the faint smell of wet earth lingering in the air. Alexander sank to the floor, shaking uncontrollably. For the first time in his life, he whispered a prayer, not for wealth, not for power, but for forgiveness. I didn't mean to. I didn't. His voice broke into sobs. But forgiveness doesn't always come easily, especially when the one wrong can no longer hear. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the mighty Alexander Grayson sat on the floor of his penthouse, surrounded by silence and ghosts of his own cruelty. And though the world below continued as usual, within that high tower of glass and pride, something unseen watched, patiently, waiting for him to understand that this was only the beginning of his punishment. By the next morning, Alexander Grayson was no longer the powerful man who once ruled from glass towers and gold-plated offices. The newspapers branded him the fallen billionaire, and his face filled every channel, not as a symbol of success, but as a warning. Investigations had begun, authorities had seized his assets, and former allies who had once worshipped him now denied ever knowing him. His name, once whispered with awe, was now spat with disgust. But Alexander barely noticed. He was trapped inside his own unraveling mind. His penthouse, once immaculate, had become a ruin of its own. Curtains drawn, bottles scattered, papers torn, and mirrors covered with bedsheets. He couldn't stand seeing his reflection anymore. Every time he looked, he thought he saw that puppy staring back. Sometimes when the wind blew, he swore he heard paws running across the marble. Sometimes it was a faint whimper again, and sometimes when the lightning flashed, he saw muddy footprints appearing on the floor, even though no one had entered. Sleep had abandoned him completely. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same moment, the stick rising, the puppy crying, and the laughter that had escaped his lips that day. Except now, in his nightmares, the roles reversed. He was the one on the ground, small and helpless, while something larger loomed over him. He'd wake drenched in sweat, gasping for breath, feeling the phantom pain of every blow he'd. That afternoon, Nora, his former assistant, finally gathered enough courage to visit. The guards outside the building hesitated. The once mighty Grayson had become an urban myth of madness. When she entered, she barely recognized him. "Mr. Grayson?" she called softly. He was sitting in the dark, hunched in an armchair near the window. "They took everything," he murmured without looking at her. "The company, the cars, the houses, even the dogs I used to keep in cages are gone. They took everything." "Sir," she said gently, "you need to leave the city. The investigation's getting worse. Reporters—" "I can't leave," he interrupted, voice hoarse. "It's here." "What is—" He turned toward her, and for the first time, she saw the madness in his eyes, wild, terrified, like a hunted animal. The thing I hurt. It's here with me." Nora hesitated, pity flashing across her face. "You mean the puppy?" He nodded slowly. "It won't leave me. It follows me. Every time I turn around, I see it. It doesn't speak, but I feel it. It wants me to suffer like it did." "Sir," she whispered, "that's just guilt. You need rest. You need help." He shook his head violently. "No, you don't understand. It's real. Last night, it called me. It spoke." Before she could respond, the television turned on again, by itself. Static. Then the screen flickered to show the garden camera once more. The same spot. But this time, it wasn't the puppy sitting there. It was Alexander himself, or something that looked exactly like him, kneeling on the ground, crying. The figure lifted its head and stared directly into the camera. The lights in the penthouse dimmed, and a low, rumbling growl filled the air, not from the TV, but from somewhere inside the room. Nora froze, staring behind him. "Sir," she whispered, "behind you." Alexander turned slowly. His breath caught. On the other side of the room, near the shattered television, stood the small brown puppy. Its fur was still damp, its body trembling slightly, but its eyes, those deep, glistening eyes, no longer held fear. They held sorrow. The puppy limped toward him. With each step, the lights flickered. The air felt heavier, colder. "You see it?" Alexander gasped, tears filling his eyes. "You see it too?" Nora didn't answer. Her voice broke. I don't see anything." The puppy stopped a few feet away from him. Alexander fell to his knees. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know. I didn't mean—" He reached out his hand, shaking uncontrollably. The puppy tilted its head slightly, and for a moment, the world went utterly silent. Then, without a sound, it vanished, gone like mist. The lights steadied. The air warmed. Alexander stared at the empty spot where it had been. "You saw it," he said desperately, turning to Nora. "Tell me you saw it." But Nora was already backing away, eyes wide with fear. "You need help," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, sir, you're not well." She left quickly, the door slamming behind her. Alexander remained on the floor, sobbing into his hands. He wasn't sure anymore whether what he had seen was real or a punishment his mind had created to torture him. But one thing was certain, he no longer owned his own peace. Later that night, as he sat staring at the city below, he saw something that made his heart stop. Down in the street, among the lights of passing cars, a small brown shape limped slowly across the road. No one else seemed to notice it. No one else stopped. It walked right up to the building, paused, and looked up directly at his window. Alexander pressed his forehead against the glass. "Please," he whispered, voice cracking. "What do you want from me?" Thunder rumbled again, distant yet echoing like a heartbeat. And though the puppy made no sound, something deep inside him understood the answer. It didn't want revenge. It wanted him to feel, to know what helplessness was, to face every ounce of pain he had ever caused. And as lightning illuminated the sky once more, Alexander Grayson, once a man who feared nothing, finally understood that there are things in this world you cannot buy, silence, or bury. Some debts, no matter how much money or pride you have, are only paid in pain. The night after Nora's visit was the longest of Alexander's life. Every clock in the penthouse had stopped at 10 o'clock, the exact time he'd struck the puppy. No matter how many times he wounded them, replaced batteries, or even smashed them in frustration, the hands refused to move. Time itself seemed frozen, as if the universe had decided that his life would never move beyond that single cruel moment. The power flickered all evening, the rain falling in steady sheets outside. The once beautiful view of the city now looked like a drowning world, lights distorted by water and shadow. Alexander sat alone on the floor, wrapped in a blanket, shaking. The mansion's ghostly silence pressed in from all sides. The sound of thunder no longer startled him. The sound he feared now was smaller, softer, the faint tap of paws on marble, the whisper of claws across tile, the distant echo of a whimper that never stopped. He had tried everything to escape it. He burned the stick he'd used that morning, hoping the act would erase what he had done. But even as it turned to ashes, he thought he saw shapes in smoke, tiny paw prints swirling through the air before vanishing. He had smashed every mirror, terrified of what stared back from the other side. Yet even the shattered glass sometimes reflected more than just his face. Sometimes it showed a small, blurred shape standing behind him, watching. His phone buzzed again. He didn't want to look. Every message now came from nowhere. But something inside him forced him to glance at the screen. Another video file, no sender. He opened it with trembling hands. It showed footage from inside his own penthouse. The angle was from the hallway camera, yet he hadn't checked it in days. The video began with an empty hall, dimly lit. Then, slowly, Alexander himself appeared in the frame, walking, muttering, holding his head. Behind him, a small shadow followed, low to ground. Step for step, the puppy, the man in the video, stopped and turned, as if sensing it. But the moment he did, the shadow vanished. The man looked around, confused, then screamed. The camera flickered, and for a brief second, the puppy was sitting right in front of him, head tilted, eyes glowing faintly. The video ended. The phone slipped from Alexander's hands and crashed to the floor, screen cracking. His breathing turned shallow. "It's inside," he whispered to no one. "It's here." He grabbed his coat, desperate to flee. He didn't know where to go, anywhere but here. But when he opened the front door, he froze. The hallway was filled with paw prints. Wet, muddy, leading into his apartment, not out of it. His throat tightened. He looked left. The corridor stretched endlessly, darker than usual, as if it led somewhere that didn't exist. He took one hesitant step outside, then another. The door behind him shut on its own, locking with a soft click. The world around him seemed unreal. The lights flickered again, and for a brief moment, the walls rippled, like reflections in water. He stumbled forward, heart pounding. The elevator at the end of the hallway stood open, humming faintly. He stepped in, hitting the button for the ground floor. The door slid shut. The descent began. But then, instead of stopping, the elevator kept going, lower and lower, past the lobby, past the basement, into places no building plans ever mentioned. The numbers on the screen glitched. B2, B9, B17. Then nothing, just static. When the doors opened, Alexander was surrounded by darkness. The only light came from a single bulb flickering above a long corridor lined with glass walls. He stepped forward, each breath visible in the cold air. Behind each pane of glass was a reflection of himself, dozens of them, all looking back at him, some younger, some older, all with the same hollow eyes. But one reflection stood out. In it, he wasn't alone. The small brown puppy sat at his feet, staring up at him. He moved closer, his reflection doing the same. But the puppy's reflection didn't stay still. It moved differently, tilting its head as if it were looking directly at him, not his reflection. "What are you?" Alexander whispered, his voice trembling. The reflection smiled, not the puppy but himself. His own reflection smiled back, cruel and mocking. "You know what I am," the reflection said, though its lips never moved. The voice echoed inside his mind. "I'm everything you created. Every tear, every scream, every life you crushed. You built me." Alexander stumbled back, shaking his head. No, you're not real." The reflection stepped closer, pressing its palm against the glass. "Neither are you anymore." The lights flickered, and suddenly all the reflections moved, pounding their fists against the glass, whispering his name in unison. "Alexander, Alexander, Alexander." The sound grew louder until it became a roar. The glass began to crack. He turned and ran, heart hammering, but the corridor seemed endless. Behind him, the sound of breaking glass followed like a wave. Then came the faint, unmistakable patter of paws. He reached in the corridor and threw open a door, stepping out into blinding light. When his vision cleared, he was back in his penthouse. The clock still read 10 o'clock. The rain still fell. Everything exactly as it was. Had it all been in his mind? He didn't know. He didn't care. He collapsed to his knees, sobbing. And then, from the corner of the room, came that sound again, gentle, soft, and utterly real. Whimper. He lifted his head slowly. The puppy stood a few feet away, silent, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. But this time there was something different. Its small tail moved once, side to side, not in forgiveness, but in farewell. Then it turned toward the open balcony, walked forward, and vanished into the rain. Alexander sat frozen, tears mixing with the sound of thunder. He realized in that moment that the haunting wasn't a curse. It was a mirror, a reflection. The morning came, but the light brought no warmth. The storm had passed, leaving the city washed and gleaming, but inside Alexander Grayson's penthouse, the air still felt heavy, thick with the residue of something unseen. The clock still read 10 o'clock. Frozen forever at the moment his life had split in two. He hadn't eaten, slept, or spoken to another human being in 2 days. The world outside had already moved on without him. His name had become a headline turned old news. The empire he once ruled was now being auctioned off piece by piece. But none of it mattered anymore. He had stopped caring about money, fame, or even survival. All that remained was the silence and the thing inside it. He wandered through his penthouse barefoot, staring at the fragments of his once perfect life. Broken mirrors, smashed glass, torn photographs. He picked up one frame from the floor, a photo of him standing proudly beside his company's logo, smiling with false confidence. The glass had cracked perfectly across his face, a clean split from forehead to chin. He stared at it for a long time before whispering, "Who are you?" The faint sound of a bark made him freeze. It came from the balcony, soft, distant, almost kind. He turned slowly. The curtains fluttered, the door slightly open, letting in a cold gust of wind that carried the smell of rain. He walked closer, every step deliberate, every breath shallow. "Are you back?" he asked softly, voice breaking. "Please, I just want to see you once more." He stepped onto the balcony. The city stretched endlessly below, silent and silver under the morning clouds. And there, at the far end of the balcony rail, sat the small brown puppy. Its fur shimmered with dew, eyes deep and knowing. It looked calm, almost peaceful, its head tilted as if listening. Alexander dropped to his knees, tears already spilling down his cheeks. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know what I was doing. I thought life was about power, about control. But I see it now. I see what I became." The puppy blinked slowly, then took one small step toward him. For a heartbeat, Alexander smiled, the first genuine smile in years. "You forgive me?" he asked. But the air changed. The wind grew colder, sharper. The puppy's eyes darkened slightly, reflecting not forgiveness but understanding, the kind of understanding that belongs to something older than men, older than guilt. The ground beneath Alexander's knees trembled faintly. He looked around, startled. The balcony rail creaked as thunder rumbled far away, though no storm remained. He reached out a trembling hand. "Please," he whispered, "I just want peace." The puppy gave a single, soft bark, the same sound it had made before he heard it. And then, as if the universe had waited for that note, the entire world seemed to pause. The wind stopped. The city noise vanished. The only thing left was silence, perfect, unbearable silence. Then the puppy disappeared. Gone in a blink. Alexander gasped and stumbled backward. "No, wait." He looked over the edge of the balcony, heart racing. Nothing, only the street below, quiet and wet. He turned back toward the apartment, but something stopped him dead in his tracks. The reflection in the glass door no longer showed him standing there. It showed the puppy instead, sitting calmly where he stood, looking at him through the glass. He reached out to touch the door. His reflection didn't move. It stared back at him, unblinking. Then, slowly, the reflection tilted its head. Just like the puppy used to, his knees weakened. The reflection's mouth began to move, but no sound came out. Only one word appeared in the fog his breath left on the glass. "Remember." The wind roared again, violently this time. Papers flew across the room, bottles shattered, lights flickered. Alexander stumbled backward, tripping over the chair, falling hard onto the floor. Pain shot through his arm, but he didn't care. He crawled toward the center of the room, shouting, "I remember! I remember!" His voice cracked into a sob. "Please, make it stop." For a moment, the chaos ceased. The lights dimmed to a soft glow. The smell of wet earth filled the air. And then, from the shadows near the door, the puppy appeared one last time. It didn't limp anymore. Its fur was clean, shining faintly. It walked to him slowly, and this time Alexander didn't move. He just watched, broken and trembling. The puppy stopped at his knees and looked up. Its eyes were kind, not human, not divine, but something in between. It pressed its small head gently against his trembling hand. Warm, real, alive. And just like that, the clock on the wall began to tick again. 10:01. For a few precious seconds, Alexander just knelt there, frozen, feeling the small heartbeat against his hand. It was real, impossibly, wonderfully real. The tiny chest rose and fell beneath his trembling fingers. The warmth spread up his arm like sunlight breaking through years of darkness. He hadn't realized how long it had been since he'd felt anything human, anything alive. The puppy stayed there, silent, its soft fur brushing against his palm, grounding him in a moment that felt outside of time itself. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the warmth began to fade. The puppy stepped back, its eyes meeting his one final time. Something in them shifted. No longer sorrow, no longer accusation, but peace. It turned toward the balcony, paused once more, then walked into the light spilling through the glass doors. Its small form shimmered as it moved, almost translucent now, fading at the edges. By the time it reached the railing, it was nothing more than a ripple in the air, then gone. Alexander rose shakily to his feet, eyes wet, chest heaving. He rushed to the balcony and leaned over. Nothing but morning sun and the hum of distant traffic. The world below looked ordinary again, alive and unaware that a man's soul had just been judged. For a moment, he thought maybe this was forgiveness, that the nightmare had ended. He even felt a strange calm settle over him. He turned back toward the apartment, whispering, "Thank you, thank you." But as he stepped inside, something was different. The room had changed. The walls were cracked, the air thick with dust. The furniture was gone, the mirrors shattered long ago. He blinked, disoriented. The penthouse didn't look like his anymore. It looked abandoned ruin, as if years had passed in a single breath. On the far wall, where his company's logo had once hung, something was scrawled in dark, uneven strokes. 10 minutes. A chill ran down his spine. He stumbled backward, heart pounding. "No," he whispered. "No, I did what you wanted." But the ticking clock on the wall, the one that had been frozen for days, began to tick faster. 10:02, 10:03, 10:04. The hands spun wildly, time catching up with everything he had stolen. Each tick echoed like thunder in his skull. His vision blurred. The ground trembled. The sound of glass cracking filled the air again, louder this time, as if reality itself was splitting open. The penthouse lights flickered, and then the walls began to shimmer. Through them, he could see scenes, fragments of everything he had destroyed. The animals he'd harmed, the people he'd exploited, the friends he'd betrayed. Faces, voices, cries, all flashing like lightning around him. He covered his ears, screaming, "Stop, please, I can't take it anymore." And then silence. When he opened his eyes, he was standing in the middle of his office, the one he'd ruled from like a throne. It was pristine, just as it had been the morning before everything began. The city outside buzzed with life. His reflection in the window looked young again, powerful, confident. For a moment, he dared to hope it had all been a dream. Then he turned and froze. Sitting on his desk was a small brown puppy, alive. Oh, looking up at him with those same deep, endless eyes. He didn't move. The puppy tilted its head, then jumped down and padded toward him, tail wagging softly. It stopped at his feet. Alexander crouched down slowly, reaching out with trembling fingers. The puppy leaned forward, and for the briefest instant, he saw something inside its eyes, a flash of light, and in it, the reflection of himself, older, hollow, broken. And then he understood. This wasn't a second chance. This was the moment before everything had happened. The universe had looped him back to the place where it all began. The morning he'd chosen cruelty over compassion. The morning he looked down at a helpless animal and decided to break something purer. He began to cry, not the tears of a guilty man, but a soul that finally understood what mercy meant. He whispered, "Not again." He knelt on the cold marble, lowered his head, and pressed his forehead to the floor. "I won't hurt you," he said through the tears. "Never again." The puppy wagged its tail once, then stepped closer, licking his hand. At that exact moment, the clock struck 10 o'clock.